She was born on 23rd of July 2013. Thea was a perfectly normal baby, apart from being a pain in the bum during pregnancy and being the wrong way around and causing mum to have a C-section. She was absolutely fine until we discovered about 5 months old, as she started to sit sort of unaided on her own, that she had a bit of a lump or a bump protruding from her lower back. And also, obviously, as any curious parent would do, we asked to get this checked out. We took her to the local GP, who initially explained to Samantha and said, I think she could have mild spina bifida. Of course, that was scary. You know, we straight away asked for a referral to a consultant to see, to get to the bottom of what it was. At which case we were told it would be 3 months to wait for that referral. Ava, go over there. Go get mummy. So at which point we made a conscious decision that we couldn't wait that long. We had to know what this was, so we went privately and we contacted Dr. Circuiti at the Nuffield in Leeds, and he arranged to see us within about 5 days. So we took Thea to see him, and at that point he made out like he didn't have a clue what was wrong with her. He said, look, don't worry, we will get to the bottom of this. We will have her x-rays, we'll have ultrasounds, etc., whatever we need to do. Actually, cheekily, he said, I'll make sure you don't have to pay for any of that, even though you come to me privately, because underlyingly he knew exactly what it was. He'd very luckily, he was a breathing specialist, but he had seen this before, I think twice, where he'd treated children with breathing issues, which subsequently is one of the affected organs and issues that MPS presents. So we went off for our x-rays, and then he asked to see us straight away that day. By that point we'd already come home, so we said, we'll come back and see you tomorrow, at which point our worlds were turned upside down. We obviously went into his office. There was grandma was there, my mother, me, Sam, and just Thea. Ava was at nursery, and he proceeded to he sort of built up slowly. He was a lovely man. He really was. He was very caring, and he sort of told us his findings, but to a point where it was in doctor talk that we didn't really understand, and then he proceeded to break it down and basically explain to us that our child had a terminal illness and wouldn't live beyond 9 years old if she made it that far. I don't think he knew of potentially, because he didn't know what type of MPS she had, whether there would have been anything they could do. Most children with MPS are told they will receive tentative care, but there is no cure. There is nothing that can just say this is a magic cure and we will get rid of it. Hence, when we were referred to Manchester and we went to see the team there, they then told us she had MPS I once they'd done blood tests, and said because of her age, because of how healthy she was a perfect candidate for a bone marrow transplant. This bone marrow transplant, again, was not a cure, but would fix the decline in her health at that point. And in theory, she would have had a more normal life expectancy. How she would have developed in herself was anyone's guess. She may have been absolutely fine, had no learning issues. She may have been very severely handicapped or disabled. Whatever it would have been, we would have tackled that, I'd like to think, head on. I think it's every parent's worst nightmare to think that they're going to have a disabled child. But I think, as we discussed before, you just get on with it. As far as in any other person's eyes, you would have looked at Thea, she was just a beautiful, smiley, happy child who didn't have a care in the world. And I think sometimes we have no regrets of what we did, because we had every question answered, we had every possible avenue explored, and we did absolutely everything we could for Thea, including being there for her 24/7, giving her the love that she needed. And actually, I think us doing that probably made her fight harder. She knew we were there, but knowing that she may have been fine till she was about a year old, and then all this could have kicked in and she could have started showing deterioration. But no one can plot or progress or plan the deterioration within the body, because each patient's different, you know, and each type of MPS is different. So she was admitted into hospital, and her bone marrow transplant it's classed these days, there's different types. So with an adult patient, you potentially will take a bone marrow sample from the lower back, and then you can do live organ sort of donation. Thea had something called stem cell therapy. So they take the blood from umbilical cords from mothers who've just had children. They then freeze it, add additives, and then most of it's stored in the USA. One of the things Manchester is currently doing is trying to create their own storage of these stem cells, so they can basically build up a bigger bank of all different types of, you know, ethnic origin, you know, and skin colour, I suppose, because with Thea being a perfectly healthy Caucasian little girl, she had a lot of options really. We ended up going, I think it was a 7 out of 8 match, which is about as good as you're going to get, because her original cord, which was going to be flown over from St. Louis in the USA, was an 8 out of 8 match. But when they come to test the cord, or colonise it as they call it, they found that 50% of the cells had died, unfortunately. So we had to go with Plan B, which was a British cord. And actually, as we found out from Professor Rob Wynne, who was our bone marrow professor, she actually was given the first ever British cord to be given in a bone marrow transplant in Manchester. So she was unique in every way to us anyway, but that made her even more unique, and you know, quite a good statistic, I suppose. So she was given her bone marrow. It starts off, you have chemotherapy, as though you had cancer or leukemia, to remove the body's own bone marrow that it has, and to suppress the immune system. This was done in quite a short period of time, about 10 days. And then a couple of days after that, they then give the bone marrow. And it's actually a very simple procedure. A lot of people think it's a lot more complex. And it is literally just a syringe of the blood put into a central line, which was called a Hickman line, which she had actually infitted through a surgery about 2 weeks before her bone marrow transplant. We will always remember the smell. When they administer a bone marrow through stem cell, it smells like sweet corn. It's horrendous. And from then on, really, Thea was great for probably about a week. You know, she was doing really well. Obviously, they monitor her rigorously. She's in solitary confinement, so you know, it's very, very strict regulations who can come in, who can come out. And it was, you know, timescales are not going to be exact, but within a couple of weeks, we found out that the marrow was in grafting, so it was successful as such. She was already starting to produce enzyme levels, and but then at that point she developed flu. Now it's anyone's guess where that came from, how she got it. She was in solitary confinement. Whether it could have been from one of us, it could have been from Ava, it could have been from a nurse, a doctor, but that's not the question we ask. It's just that she got it, you know, and it was influenza type A originally, and at that point, you know, she obviously started to struggle with her breathing, to the point where eventually one day she just was struggling so bad, even though she had what they call nasal specs, administering oxygen at a certain level, that they had to rush her to ICU as she needed some more assistance. That day, as she progressed at ICU, she actually deteriorated a lot more significantly, to the point where that evening the ICU consultant on duty was administering maximum support through the oscillator machine, and had run out of options. And at that point, this consultant on duty that night was called Peter Mark, very reputable. He was head of ICU at the Manchester Royal Children's Hospital. He basically said to us, look, we're at a crossroads. We are on maximum support. We're on full oxygen levels. We are at full pressures. We're stuck. There's nowhere else for us to go, and she's still deteriorating. She's still satting at not a very acceptable level. the only option we can possibly try is something called ECMO, which is, I'm not going to try and go into the technical name, but something that is only performed in 5 hospitals in the UK, and it's very big in the US. So we went through a period of hours through where we had to wait for a decision as to she was going to be allowed to be accepted onto ECMO, because no child with MPS post bone marrow with influenza had ever been accepted onto ECMO and survived. Thankfully, they accepted her. We were due to be flown in a helicopter to Glasgow. As we thought we were about to be packed off to go, they changed their minds because the RAF couldn't fly in the weather, and we got taken in an ambulance to Leicester, or Thea did. We followed down in the car. At this point, we'd had no sleep for 3 days. It was pretty stressful. And they expected her to be on ECMO for about 6 to 10 days. Thea actually astounded everyone and came off ECMO, I think, on day 4.5. We spent 2 weeks in Leicester. Again, at that point though, they had administered a massive dose of steroids, which, as we know now, had dampened down her inflammatory response within her body. So after 2 weeks, she was extubated in Leicester. We returned to Manchester. She returned straight to the bone marrow transplant ward, and we were thinking, great, we've got through the hard bit. As we found out when we got back, we were told, look, if she can get through the next couple of weeks, she should get through this fine. 3 days later, Thea started to deteriorate again, and we ended up on the HDU unit at Manchester. And again, 24 hours, 48 hours later, she deteriorated significantly more, to the point where she was brought back into ICU again. You know, really struggling to bring those saturation levels up. And we spent 2 weeks in ICU. After about the first week, it started to dawn on us how serious all this had become, because it wasn't only the struggling to breathe, she'd also developed something called graft versus host disease. When she returned to Manchester, she had it at stage 1. It very quickly, within 2 days, developed to stage 4, of which we think it was in the lungs as well as her skin, and her skin was, it almost looked like it was fully covered in burns and blisters, and her skin was actually being treated by the specialist burns unit. Her eyes, she developed GVHD in her eyes as well, so the specialist ophthalmologists had to do her eye care every day. And yeah, I think after about a week we had some very, very tough decisions and tough conversations with the consultants, and it was agreed if her heart was to stop, we would not resuscitate. If she was to deteriorate significantly, we wouldn't rally, we wouldn't prolong, we wouldn't push the inevitable. We would let her go peacefully. And I think after the 2 weeks, you know, we knew we were at that point again, as we were the first time she was in ICU, where we'd hit a brick wall and there was nowhere to go. She was on full pressures, and she'd suffered, you know, for months. And it was time to we had to make a dignified decision for Thea. So obviously all our family and friends came along and all said their goodbyes. And we sat down and we had a cuddle, and we let Thea go to sleep. And she was at peace, and I think we take solace from that, knowing that she is in a more peaceful place, and she isn't hooked up to tubes and in pain, and and you only had to look at our little girl with all that stuff going on in her skin, and she didn't look like a happy little child that Thea was, and how we want to remember Thea. Samantha and I set up Thea's Trust in March, just as Thea was going for her bone marrow transplant. We felt we wanted to do something to help raise awareness and to help other families as well as ourselves, and as well as Thea, through this experience. We didn't know what we were going to encounter or what was going to happen. So, and as a way for me of almost maintaining a little bit of sanity, giving me something to do. Obviously we were both off work, and it gave me something to sort of sink my teeth into a little bit. So we set up Thea's Trust originally as a discretionary trust, and now we are a couple of days off becoming a full charity, and as well as limited company status, obviously non-profit making. this will open up more avenues and allows us to raise a lot more money. The primary functions of the charity will be to provide to raise vital funds to support other families whose children are diagnosed with MPS I. We, to begin with, want to just support those families within the north of England. So it'll be the families that go and have their diagnosis at Manchester, as we did. We're probably expecting that to be 2 or 3 children a year. We don't want to be one of these trusts that you apply to and you maybe get £100, £200 towards your travel expenses. We want to be the go-to whereby we support everything, even if that runs into tens of thousands of pounds, if that's where it needs to be. Hence where we want it to be a little bit more individual and bespoke to the needs of each family, rather than going for the full spectrum of every type of MPS, which obviously would run into a lot more figures. I mean, so far to date we've had a launch night. Unfortunately, we weren't able to attend that due to that being the first time Thea was administered into ICU, and all family and friends rushing to Manchester again to potentially say, goodbye. As well as so much support, unbelievable amounts of support and fundraising from our best friends to Jack the lad, who we don't have a clue who they are, to checks just turning up in the post. And so far to date, I think we've raised nearly £21,000 in 3 months. And I don't feel like I've got started yet. So moving forward, obviously we want this charity to, like I say, to just be Thea's legacy. She will never be forgotten, but also to help others, and the more awareness we can raise, the more we can help the professionals, the consultants, the GPs, as well as everyday people to understand a little bit more about MPS, what it is, and I think the primary thing is to understand the symptoms and what to look out for, I suppose. MPS is very rare, it affects 10 in a million children, but like us, we unfortunately were one of those unlucky families and we didn't have a clue. And I'd like to think we're doing our bit to make sure people do know.